I don't do well in lighted environments. I'm getting all sorts of, after images on my retina. I don't know why. Am I just meant to be some sort of creature of the night? Is that it? Am I not meant to exist in places with illumination? I honestly don't know how people handle having ring lights right in front of them. I would be blind, 1,000% blind. It's just nothing that's gonna happen. It's just not gonna happen. Also, it just makes people look like a robot, with that circle exactly around the rim of their pupils. Why? That's creepy. That's scary AF. Why? Hello again, everyone. I am the Game Catcher, and apparently you guys really like Chronicles of Elyria, so we're getting back on that topic today. It's been a while. I've meant to make another video on this topic, I think in September or October. I actually had sat down and recorded a full video on this. And then the adventure completion from pre to alpha was uploaded the very next day after I recorded that, and I was like, oh, well, I guess I got to redo it then, and I never got the chance because things got busy. But in my last video, some of you brought up concerns about the development process, and Twitchy Sphere had a particularly good comment on this. Basically about how we haven't seen a MUD yet, that it was supposed to have started a year ago, that there has been almost no demonstration of the mechanics or features they plan to put in the game, and about how they've been having issues with finding a publisher. I know less about that part, but I do have a story about a separate game and publishers that I can talk about later. And there are points where I agree and disagree with them, but the dev blog that came out for the end of release 0.4, it was like they had a psychic connection to Twitchy Sphere, because they addressed at least half of those points. With, first of all, the issue of the MUD, and apparently Soulbound's idea of a MUD is different from some other people's idea of a MUD, because Soulbound's MUD was text-based, sort of like those really, really old, the first ever Dungeons and Dragons things, or, oh gosh, what was that game before where you were just reading text on a screen and inputting directions to the character and things were happening outside, but the realm of vision, but whatever. But basically, that type of MUD, zero graphics, but really, really good at seeing basically how the programming would affect certain aspects, like the stats, at least. Very good at getting immediate responses on certain things, but other things you can't really test with that. You can run the numbers and say if your character does this, the receiving character has this much damage done to them, like rolling the dice in a D&D game, but you don't also get the character models acting out what it is you're having them do. And so that's where the Elyria 2D-ish going into Vox Elyria going into pre-Elyria comes in. Because they did basically try that sort of 2D sprite thing and decide that's not good enough. We need to go more in depth with the assets. And then with Vox Elyria, still not good enough. They're Minecraft. This is basically Minecraft here. We can't test out all of the hard programming things we need in regards to actual character models in here. It's good for testing weather systems, perhaps. Good for testing plant growth and animal behaviors and NPC behaviors, but actual movements, not so much. And so the pre-Elyria, that's getting more into the actual alpha territory. That is looking really good. I find the cell shaded approach an interesting decision just because it reminds me of a whole lot of indie games. A whole lot of indie games have been going that route with like that animation style. And it's still simple enough that it's not going to cause a whole lot of issues with the graphics team, having to constantly pull them away from other projects to help work with the programmers and everything. That was a concern of mine when I was reading about the Vox Elyria, the 2D-ish thing. I was like, that's... the programming for those things is like apples and oranges. It's not going to scale well. They do seem like they know what they're doing at the least. Furthermore, into some of the programming stuff that I was like interested in reading about, and I really kind of need them to have further dev blogs that go into each aspect of the programming that they've been doing, and just go further into depth with that. I was around for a sort of live Q&A, those things, streams, chat streams, whatever you call them, for the personal destiny system. I really like that. Like, if you guys haven't noticed, I'm kind of into astrology. It's like bullshit, but it's fun bullshit, you know? Like, I considered it more bullshit when all I knew was that my sun sign is Aries, and yet all of my things align with Pisces, only to find out, if, like, you get my full chart, oh shit, half of everything on this chart is Pisces. I am heavily skewed to Pisces. It's not even funny. I'm laughing a little, it actually is. I'm going to be interested to see how in-depth the astrology and personal destiny system really get into, and to see if you can actually track how all of that interacts. Because an idea that was presented and was kind of like the initial idea for me joining the Vale of Vainglory in Ashland was to have characters that were basically soothsayers and who could look at your birth date and all of the signs and the stars and the alignment of the planets and tell you parts of your destiny based off that, because it's an actual mechanic. And that could be a sort of useful knowledge set to have, to know your personal destiny before it actually gets implemented. So I want to know more about that. Always, I want to know more about the crafting system. Like, I can already tell that they are doing huge amounts of like research and development in regards to the crafting system. But what would be really, really cool would be if they got to do a demonstration video of that system, particularly their blacksmithing demonstration stuff, crafting system, whatever. Because we did get GIFs of that, but we didn't get actual game footage of it, if you will. And I think that doing that might go a long way towards resting some concern that a lot of people have about not having demonstrations. But understandably, demonstrations take time away from actually building the mechanics, so it's a bit touch and go. The weather system, though. Weather is insane. Like, some people don't understand just how complicated weather is. My particular college that I went to, like when I was in the dorms, at least 5 people on my half, like the dorms were split that way and then we're split this way. 5 people on my quarter of the dorm floor were meteorology majors. We're big with meteorology. And it's just so much calculus. There's so much calculus. I don't ask me for help with math, please. I beg of you. I'm not a math person. There is so much that goes into meteorology, and it's always happening all the time, and it's nearly impossible to predict because there's always so many little things that you can't account for, that you can't really measure for, because maybe it's happening on the other side of the world, maybe it's happening in a part of the world that doesn't have like the maintenance, the what's the word? Monitoring? Is that it? Monitoring systems? That doesn't have the monitoring systems in place to like tell you what's going on in that particular section. How fast is the wind going over here? Where's the jet stream? Jet streams are important. What's happening with El Nino? Just, there's so much. There's so much. So that they're implementing a worldwide weather system is a level of complexity in regards to programming that I can just barely comprehend and grasp enough to appreciate how difficult it is. Another part of that caught my attention was combat. Like, they were saying something about how the combat, there were like 2 styles and there were only like 2 buttons on the mouse, typically, and how that was limiting sort of the mechanics of the combat. And they wanted to make it sort of a timing-based system. And that brought to my mind sort of Witcher. Like, do you guys remember Witcher, the first Witcher game? Because I can sort of see them potentially doing a combination of the combat from the first Witcher game and the combat from For Honor. Because you know how in For Honor they have all sorts of really complicated sort of like left mouse button, right mouse button, different buttons on the WASD around there, things that you can do to do certain combos and stuff. And in The Witcher, you had sort of 3 main styles that you could do in the first game. Bear style, wolf style, cat style, I think they were, which are basically strong, regular, and fast. And you would switch styles depending on what type of enemy you were facing, and you couldn't button mash your way through combat. It was in fact impossible to fight anyone if you were constantly clicking like you do in most combat games nowadays. You would have to wait for the timer, and it had a little sword in the middle of the screen that would flash red, and then you could click. And you would want to chain combos by timing your clicks correctly, and it would be different depending on what style you were using. So when I think of how they're going to be implementing a combat system that's a combination of character skill and like user skill, I can't help but imagine sort of a mashup of those 2 wildly different systems. It would be interesting. It would be very interesting. But it also sounds like a lot of complex programming that they couldn't really copy and paste. And that was one part of Twitchy Sphere's comment that I have sort of a disagreement with. They mentioned the game Pantheon: Rise of the Fallen, which was kickstarted around the same time as Chronicles of Elyria, and basically linked to me an hour-long video of their gameplay. And to me, it just sort of looked like an hour-long gameplay of World of Warcraft, or of like a whole lot of other MMOs that I've seen elsewhere. Again, I don't really like the phrase apples and oranges, comparing apples and oranges, because honestly, you can compare apples and oranges. They're both fruits. One is red or green, one is orange, one has a peel you can eat or like remove as you choose. The other, if you eat that peel, you're insane. But I feel like the programming for the Pantheon: Rise of the Fallen, there was a lot of it you could have copied and pasted from other games and just brought in there. Whereas, again, there's just a whole lot going on in Chronicles of Elyria that's just gonna take time, because it's being built almost from the ground up, but there's a lot that isn't. Just like, I understand the criticism. Chronicles of Elyria does have a video where it shows a character walking around a village, riding on a horse, going about places. I don't remember if there's like actual people in that area, but there are a couple of animals. But it's not quite the same thing as an hour-long gameplay. They just don't have the world set up yet to do that, but they probably will soon. It's not gonna look like we are going to expect Chronicles of Elyria to look like, nor should it. It's an alpha, but I think that the pre-alpha should be ready either by the end of 0.50 or by the end of 0.60. So that's at least good news. I'm, again, assuming, just because they are on the road to it. They are actually taking the piece, like, I really love Soulbound Studios' like metaphor of assembling a car, because that's pretty much exactly what it is. They manufactured all the parts of the car in separate areas and are sort of assembling them together. I think map voting was also a big part of that, because I don't think they could have even started working on making the pre-alpha before they had set down, okay, this is what it's gonna look like. They wouldn't have wanted to do it all twice. They would have wanted, like, because a part of it, I don't know if pre-alpha gets scrapped before going into alpha, but I think the way they originally planned on doing it was having the alpha and the beta world being the same continuous sort of storyline going into like the full release of the game. And that's partially how I remember it being sold in the Kickstarter, was that if you bought access to the alpha and the beta, you also were basically buying access to creating the story of the world prior to its final release. And so, to me, that's why it makes sense that they couldn't actually do the pre-alpha before they had the map selection. So, currently, everything looks like it's on board and that it's going good, at least to my eyes. Oh, right, I forgot. I said I would have a story about publishers in video games. Okay, so, if any of you guys didn't know I was a Homestuck before, now is your warning. I was one of those Homestucks who was really looking forward to and really into the idea of Hive Swap, which was the video game that was kick-funded by the creator Andrew Hussey. And they had a lot of issues that ended up happening. Oh gosh. Now I have to remember the entire story. So basically, the Kickstarter started off with high hopes, thought maybe it would be a year or two before they could get the game out and everything. And they raised a significant amount of money, like I think $500,000 or $1 million, something like that. And Andrew was like, cool, great, I'll find a publishing group to partner with us and help us make this happen. And so the company they went with was The Odd Gentleman. They also produced the King's Quest series, the episodic game series that came out like not too long ago. And things went on for a lot longer than anyone ever expected. And they only really had like one trailer that was sort of semi 3D-ish, like half cel shaded, and it wasn't even really that good. And Hussey was like, hey guys, when are you gonna, help make the game, guys? And the Odd Gentlemen were just like, give or take a couple months, it's fine. And it turns out they'd basically been delaying that while using all of the Kickstarter money to fund their other games, to fund the production of other games that weren't Hive Swap. And once the Huss figured this out, they went to court, and I think they only got half or less than half of the original Kickstarter money back from the Odd Gentleman once it got settled. And basically, Hussey had to create his own game studio in order to make it happen on half the budget. And it became a point-and-click game, which honestly I think was a vast improvement, just given like Homestuck's characteristic style. And it turned out so much prettier too, like the graphics are lovely. That's kind of why if Soulbound Studios has been having problems finding a publisher, I'm kind of not upset about it. Because if you're not careful about who you sign with and who you sign your rights to and who you give your money to, they could end up screwing you over big time. Just, if they self-publish, they remain in full control, with full creative control, with full financial control of their own product, which I think is probably the best solution here. And like, honestly, I think of all of the games that the Odd Gentlemen have ever produced, King's Quest is the only one that ever like made a name at all. And then no one played past chapter 2, at least no one I know did. The full game is out. Does anyone care? Not really. Not really, no. It's for good reason. But anyways, yeah. So that's more of like the hard fact news that's been happening. And like, I'll talk more about map selection in the next one. So yeah, part 2s, aren't they lovely? Or 3s, technically speaking. Anyways, I'll catch you all then, so bye-bye.